This is Counterpoint.
During the demonstrations in Iran late last year, the regime killed up to 1,500 people. Despite this brutal crackdown, Iranians are once again courageously on the streets protesting against the regime.
In Iran, for quite a long time, I see real brutal attitude of the regime, defreezing of funds because of lifting of sanctions after signing JCPOA did not serve ordinary people of Iran. We are obliged to support them, to push the regime, to put things strongly.
This regime, has crumbled from inside. Lots of families in Iran are struggling for their daily ration of food. At this moment, at least 7,000 imprisoned from this November uprising only. What EU and DROI committee is doing for them? At this moment, nothing.
Welcome to another episode of Counterpoint, recorded in the European Parliament studio. During the demonstrations in Iran late last year, the regime killed up to 1,500 people. Despite this brutal crackdown, Iranians are once again courageously on the streets protesting against the regime following the downing of the civilian airliner. The false narrative of unity after the US killed Quds Force Commander Soleimani has given way to the familiar picture of an oppressed people longing for freedom. Are we seeing the last days of the regime? What should be Europe's policy vis-à-vis Tehran? And what's the future of the nuclear deal? With me to discuss these issues are Anna Fotyga, a Polish member of the Parliament, who sits in the Foreign Affairs and Security and Defense Committees, and Mohsen Behzad Karimi, a Middle East analyst. Thank you very much for being here with me. Anna, perhaps first to you. Last month, actually, you initiated a very important debate on the brutal crackdown of the protests earlier, late last year. Explain to us a little bit what you, as a Polish member of the Parliament and the former foreign minister of Poland, makes you so engaged in a topic that is geographically relatively far away from your homeland.
Well, my roots, my background are Solidarność, Polish Solidarność, Foreign Department of Solidarność. And actually, we were engaged in well-being of ordinary people, in supporting their fight for freedom, for decent living, but also for eradication of traces of oppression. And in Iran, for quite a long time, I see real brutal attitude of the regime vis-à-vis its own people. That's first and foremost, of course. I monitor being engaged in foreign affairs. I monitor activity of Iranian regime in a broader region and financing terrorism and destabilizing areas of conflict. But also what is currently or has been tested, developing the missile programs, ballistic missile programs. It was somehow in the shadow of JCPOA that we used to favor here in the European Parliament.
Right.
I was more reluctant to this.
I know, yeah. We would, in an ideal world, the United States and Europe, the transatlantic partners, working really in tandem vis-à-vis a problem such as Iran. But on many issues, you mentioned the nuclear deal. The US decided to withdraw and reintroduce sanctions. Europe wants to hold on to the deal. But also when it comes to confronting Iran's aggression in the region, the US is much more forceful. Europe is still more favoring engagement. Do you think things are maybe slowly changing here in Europe, that they are coming perhaps closer to the US type of approach?
Well, first, events in Iran cause certain reflection in Europe. That's obvious. That is why my initiative at the level of in December, last December, was successful. I was able to push it through the parliament in an ad hoc procedure, and it was possible because of huge protests and real crackdown of the government of Iran on those protests. I think that there is still much to do, both in Europe and in the United States. We have to acknowledge that this alliance is still very strong, necessary and needed. In my region, in Central and Eastern Europe, it is self-evident, it is obvious. We are very close to the United States. We name US the most important ally. We would like to combine both participating in the EU and strong transatlantic bond, and we wouldn't like to see alienation of both sides.
Mohsen, you're originally from Iran, so you have a deep insight into what is happening in your country. After the killing of Commander Soleimani, the narrative that the regime tried to portray, and that also many Western media also tried to express in their programs and newspapers, that this killing supposedly united the country. We have seen indeed large funeral procession for Soleimani, and now we're seeing a very different picture. Can you try to reconcile these two?
First of all, I have to say, the oppressive regimes are fantastic in organizing and staging mass funerals. Look at Joseph Stalin's funeral.
Sure.
One of the biggest one. I mean, mobilizing such mass in cities like Ahvaz or Kerman, which, by the way, resulted in stampedes due to the lack of organization, is not a big deal for this regime. We're seeing huge rallies organized. You should take your camera and go to the street next to these places, it's like Friday Parade taking place. You're going to see for kilometers the buses who mobilize people from outskirts and bringing them to the big cities.
Right, I've seen the videos of those long lines of buses, indeed.
So this is not out of ordinary, and this is by no way is a support. Iranian regime for many years tried to somehow put in the head of Iranian younger generation that we are the regional power, this regime is solid, and our missile program is one thing to be proud of, but we've seen out of 15 missiles they shot, rarely few of them landed in the place it's supposed to be, So people, they know this is all fake. At the time of Soviet Union, when there were marches, they were making missiles out of cardboards and paint them. And, school kids, they used to see these fakeries. And we experienced the same thing in Iran. So by no means, Qasem Soleimani, he was a puppet. And he was a puppet who was running a network of terrorism from North America to the South America to the Middle East.
Right.
And now he's gone. So nothing has changed. The network of terror is there, but the only difference is instead of traditional way, Qasem Soleimani running this chain, now they have to put few other guys with less expertise, give them 20 years, they're going to be the same as Soleimani. So the problem is still there.
Right, the problem hasn't gone away. Which brings me to the next question. How can we realistically gauge the level of discontent in Iran, and do you think that what we are seeing now is sort of the worst crisis for the regime, but do you think it will survive it, or do you think there is a realistic chance that we are seeing the end here?
I mean, we are gradually seeing the end. Regime change in Iran is inevitable, and that's what Europeans they have to understand. You know, I think it's naive to think that the regime is going to survive forever. This regime, has crumbled from inside and is only a fake mask, which we see. This regime is no more legitimate, not within the country, not in the region. Look what's happening in Iraq right now. Iraqi dissidents, their first slogans is against the Iranian regime. So the hegemonic agenda of the regime is to its end, and from internally as well, the regime has no more room for making any move. So the only thing kept the regime in its place, I can say, is a support which it receives from American Democrats and some European countries. So if they let go, the regime gonna go.
So I think there is a little disagreement, even in Europe, that probably the region would be a much better place if we had a different regime. The question is, what can Europe do in order to help the protesters and to help bring about a different Iran? What would you like to see European foreign ministers to discuss at the next meeting when they talk about Iran?
Surely we have to discuss, to put to European agenda the will of Iranian people. And we are willing to discuss it. I think that European Parliament used to be in the forefront of debates about human rights, and this factor in Iran is extremely strong. Of course, we can discuss all aspects of relationship with Iran, including trade issues. But what is absolutely obvious for me from the Brussels and Warsaw, Gdańsk perspective is that defreezing of funds because of lifting of sanctions after signing JCPOA did not serve ordinary people of Iran. To the contrary, we had an exhibition, a show of kleptocracy. Yeah. And it was more than visible for ordinary people because their life deteriorated and they saw more oppression. Recently, after protests in 2018-19, we saw also the manifestation of violence of the regime against citizens of Iran. So we are obliged to support them, to push the regime, to put things strongly. Unfortunately, in my observations during previous legislature were that trade or economic consideration used to prevail. Mm-hmm. And somehow we were not so outspoken. I mean, at least a majority of politicians were not so outspoken in presenting bad sides of existence of the regime and oppression vis-a-vis Iranian people.
Right. Mohsen, what is your advice to European policymakers?
Well, I wish we had someone here from Commission to ask them, first of all, they talk about a mechanism named Instex. How the Instex going to work in absence of Iran ratifying CFT or Palermo? How they want to engage in economic exchange with Iranian regime once they know the last time Obama administration released $150 billion to Iranian regime, as Her Excellency mentioned, not any improvement to the life of ordinary Iranian, not a single dollar of Iranian national debt has been paid,
Yeah, sure.
And the daily life, the food basket of Iranian is at there is crisis. Lots of families in Iran are struggling for their daily ration of food, Yeah. So this is one thing Europe has to have in mind. First of all, how are you going to engage with this regime without supporting terrorism? How Peugeot, Citroëns, Total, other French and German companies, they want to go to Iran without engaging to direct economical exchange with the IRGC. This is one thing. And second thing is, on the human rights issues, 1,500 young lives perished.
Including kids.
Yes, including kids. But we shall not forget, Europe shall not forget, there are at this moment at least 7,000 imprisoned from this November uprising only. So what we've done so far with this 7,000? One of my closest friends on Twitter, the guy who I used to follow his tweets, or maybe perhaps you accidentally or you by accident, because he was very engaged in Payam Mohammadi, he was arrested for 45 days now. A guy you daily see, he exchange tweet with him, He's gone, and not a single news. And the regime pressurizing his family not to contact media and not to say anything. So there are 7,000 other people like Payam. So what EU and DROI committee is doing for them at this moment? Nothing. And what is an agenda? So in two fronts, we have to tackle the Iranian issues. One is human rights, and another one, the JP, that's the next part of your question perhaps, but that's a dead deal, okay? And Instex as a mechanism is not going to work.
Right. Maybe for the last round of questions, there's a lot of talk about moderates and hardliners, reformists. Supposedly Zarif and the president are moderates. What is your assessment of these terms? Do they make sense in the internal discussion of the internal regime?
I want to say something a bit maybe is emotional for me. In 20, 30 years' time, our school kid in Iran, they're going to read a history book, and this history book going to remind them something very, very sad. Imagine regimes, Europeans supporting German Nazi regimes in 1945. This didn't happen. But now we have a fascist regime in Iran, which some of European countries are strongly supporting it. In 20 years' time, we're going to have our history books mentioning this period which Europeans didn't let this fascist regime go, And getting back to your question, we have to focus on the future, and we don't have to look back. We have to take from this moment what we have to do, what we can do for Iranian people to change our wrongdoing in the past in terms, we thought that we can make a deal with the Iranian regime, but it didn't happen.
Maybe last question to you, Anna. One of the Iranian regime's most deadly tools is Hezbollah, founded and funded by Iran, which is an important tool to, in collaboration with the murderous Assad regime, to been participating in war crimes in Syria. It is supplying weapons and technology to Shiite militias in Iraq and Yemen. It has rearmed in Lebanon. It's behaving like a state within a state. People now in Lebanon are on the street, again, also in opposition to Hezbollah and Iranian control. Is it time, perhaps, that you also take a firmer stand on Hezbollah?
Well, I remember my first term in the European Parliament. In 2005, I used to be the observer of Lebanese elections after assassination of Rafik Hariri. And I saw with my own eyes race of Hezbollah to power, ways, tools, means. I was frightened, genuinely frightened. And at that time, my voice here in the parliament, possibility of putting Hezbollah on terrorist list.
15 years ago.
Yeah, I did not change my mind.
Very good.
Sorry, Daniel, I forgot part of your question. I don't want to be accused of anything. You asked me specifically on moderate and hardliners. I mean, there's no difference. It's the same theater. bad cop and good cop. So they're playing the same God. Okay.
Sure.
Mr. Khatami and even Mr. Mousavi, who is supposedly in house arrest, are same guilty as Mr. Khamenei. So there is no difference between this. This is a game which they brought up to engage us for 20 years, and we hoped for reform for all these 2 decades. And we finally realized there is no reform. They are the same bunch of criminals. So they're just changing masks.
Well, thank you very much for this clarification. Thank you both of you for joining me here today. This is all the time we have today, and hopefully you will join us again for our next episode of Counterpoint.